Hey everybody, Chris here from Lucky Gunner. I know most of you guys are not really revolver shooters, even though I tend to talk about them a lot, and I totally understand why semi-autos are the dominant type of firearm people like to use for self-defense. But if you consider yourself a serious student of handgun marksmanship, I think you're really missing out if you don't set aside some time to really learn how to run a revolver proficiently. And today I want to talk about why. And I want to be sure to give Caleb Giddings some credit here because I was reminded of this idea when I heard a recent interview that he did on Ballistic Radio. It's something I've kind of alluded to a little bit in past videos, but today I wanted to talk about it in a little more detail. There is an advantage that I've noticed from training with revolvers that I don't think is all that obvious if you haven't done it yourself, and it has to do with the double action trigger. The revolver trigger can be pretty challenging to master, but once you do get the hang of it, I think there is something that changes mentally about the way you shoot, about the way you think about how you shoot, that's a little different from how most of us think when we are running a semi-auto. What it comes down to is that the long double action trigger stroke forces the shooter to maintain correct technique 100% of the time in order to not completely suck. So as a result, someone who is a pretty decent shooter with both semi-autos and revolvers will tend to have slightly better accuracy and maybe overall more consistent performance when they're shooting a revolver. Now, I don't know if that's how it works out for everyone, but that's definitely been the case for me. It seems to be how it's worked out for Caleb Giddings and a lot of other shooters that I've talked to. Now, another contributing factor to that phenomenon could be the lower ammo capacity. When you know you've got fewer rounds in the gun, maybe you're a little more likely to make sure those rounds hit. I think there could be something to that, but I think the bigger issue is the trigger. That double action revolver trigger is a lot less forgiving than most semi-autos, whether it's a striker fired or a single action only or a DASA. And if you're a decent pistol shooter, especially if you're shooting like a modern 9mm full-size or compact handgun, you know you can get away with imperfect technique a lot of the time. When you're really trying to push your speed, because who doesn't like to go fast, you can occasionally sacrifice your technique a little bit and maybe slap the trigger or let your grip slack off a little bit and still hit the target. And sometimes that doesn't work out and you end up missing the target completely, or you've got flyers all over the target, nowhere near where you wanted to hit. But when you're shooting a revolver, the technique is kind of all or nothing. I really have to have a good grip on the gun to counteract the 10 pounds of pressure I'm applying with my index finger in order to get that trigger moving. I can't slap or jerk the trigger. I've got to give it a smooth, consistent press all the way through every time, or I'm going to miss big. And while I'm working that trigger, I'm getting an extra tenth of a second or so to make sure that my sights are back on target before the trigger breaks again. If I try to cheat on any of that stuff because I want to go fast, my accuracy is going to fall apart right away. So the way this works to my advantage is if I shoot revolvers exclusively for a period of time, it has a way of recalibrating the way I approach shooting. So after a few good range sessions, I become more careful about my technique, and then that carries over when I pick up a semi-auto again. It trains me to be a more disciplined shooter in general. If you're already a fairly decent semi-auto shooter, and by decent, let's just say I mean you can clean a bill drill in about 4 seconds or less with a full-size pistol, somewhere in that ballpark skill-wise, but you're not really happy with your consistency or you feel like you've plateaued, try shooting a revolver for a while. After about 3 or 4 months of dedicated live fire and dry practice, I think you'll see a noticeable difference when you go back to a semi-auto. You might be able to get the same advantage from shooting a double action only semi-auto, but except for a couple of pocket pistols, nobody's really making those anymore. And I'd be willing to bet a lot of you guys probably have a revolver already just sitting in the back of your safe that you never shoot, or you know somebody who will let you borrow theirs. So even if you're a part of the crowd who is completely convinced that revolvers are obsolete and they have no value as a modern self-defense tool, consider thinking of them as a training tool instead. Learning to run a revolver really well is going to make you a better shooter in general, and you're probably going to have a lot of fun in the process.